Counselling is the second episode of Season 7 of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Kenneth Shapiro, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. It's a decent episode with I think, one of the best endings ever. It's fabulous, but of course we'll get there when we get there. The beginning involves Ray sitting on the sofa trying to watch television. Debra is trying to shampoo the rug because they have some friends coming over. Linda and Bernie are coming over, and Ray, interestingly, absolutely refuses to help, refuses to move. Usually Ray will say no, doesn't really want to get involved with the cleaning, but then he kind of breaks down and ends up helping because he doesn't want Debra to complain at him. But he doesn't on this occasion, and it gets quite heated, and they get into quite an argument, and it ends with Ray turning off the vacuum cleaner or the shampoo thing or whatever it is at the wall and then running out of the house because he knows he's going to get into trouble. And it was an unusual display from Ray, but I think it was certainly a very interesting way to start things off. We then cut to the dinner with Linda and Bernie, and we learn that they're seeing a therapist called Pamela. And Debra kind of seems interested. Maybe she's just being polite and inquiring, but she's listening. Ray basically jumps out of his seat, goes into the kitchen, is clearly panicked, is trying to distract them. He does not want to even think about going to couples counselling, and that's so apparent. But if it wasn't obvious, as soon as we cut to the next scene, it's the classic Ray and Debra in bed scene, and Ray is so panicked, he basically begs, as he says, I don't want to go to therapy. And Debra, kind of in that moment, I couldn't quite read her. Her response was kind of, to me, it seemed like she hadn't really been thinking about going to therapy. Maybe she'd given it a brief thought, but it wasn't something that she thought they absolutely should do. And then the more Ray said he didn't want to do it, Debra decided, okay, so we're going to do it. I don't love that for Debra. I don't love the fact that she is dictating what they're doing. Ray clearly doesn't want to do this, and Debra is forcing him, and I don't think that's the best way to solve any problems. I feel like forcing somebody into therapy when they're not ready is probably not a great idea. Sure, maybe for some people they'll get there and realise actually this is really beneficial, they'll open up, it'll be great, it'll be worth the time. But as one can imagine, that's not quite what happens with Ray and Debra. We're then at the therapist's office. We meet Pamela. She's played by Nancy Lenehan, and Debra talks first, and very quickly she cries, which I think is a great thing to include because I feel like anybody, if you've ever had therapy, I feel like it's natural to not want to cry, to feel embarrassed if you start crying. But it's probably one of the most common things ever. I feel like most people will cry when they go to therapy. So I think it was a really good decision to show Debra feeling emotional, feeling vulnerable, and allowing herself to cry in the moment. And Ray then tried to make himself cry with the best facial expressions. It didn't work, but it was very, very funny. And Debra says a few more things that she doesn't like about the relationship or the way things are going. And Ray says she's right, which I thought was a sensible response, and it showed that he was listening and taking things on board. I imagine it would take more than one. I've never done couples therapy, but I would imagine it would take more than 5 minutes for part of the couple to see the other person's perspective, but it worked very quickly. But then Ray kind of took it a bit too far. He was agreeing with everything. He was so eager to make changes. Everything was his fault, and it's very clear after the first maybe 20 seconds that he wasn't just agreeing and saying things were his fault because he believed them, but it's because it's the way the therapy session would go the smoothest. At least in my opinion, that's why he was doing it. And Debra's clearly unhappy. They go back home. Marie, Frank, and Robert are in the house. Obviously, they were looking after the children. And Debra points out that Ray was playing a character. And my first thought was, if that's what Ray needs to get through it, since he was forced to go there, I don't think she can be too angry at him because he didn't want to be there. But at the same time, they're not going to make any progress. if he's not being open and honest. So really, he's wasting everybody else's time as well, and he might as well at least try. And initially, when he said she's right, I did think, yeah, he's going to listen. Not that everything is his fault. I feel like they maybe spent too much time focusing on Ray's problems here and not the things that Debra did. They only really touched on that when Ray said that after a long day at work, he sometimes wants to relax. That's basically the extent of the things that Ray had to say. But again, maybe that's his fault. He could have opened up more, but he chose, as Debra said, to play this character. And I do think it's a very believable, realistic response from Ray. And I think the episode did a good job of showing, well, if you force somebody to go to therapy when they're not ready, this could be the outcome. But also, if you are the Ray of this scenario, it's your time and probably your money that you're wasting because you're not going to make any improvements. So I feel like it's just a really terrible scenario all around. And then Marie decides that she's going to step in because some people have said maybe she could be a good counselor. And actually, I think she did a really good job of initially steering the conversation. And I think initially I kind of thought, is she ever going to side with Debra? Because obviously she's going to want to side with Ray and point out all of Debra's flaws. But then I realised she's speaking as somebody who has been married to Frank for many, many years. So she understands a lot of the complaints that Debra has. And I actually think Marie was in a really good position to guide the conversation. And for a couple of minutes, that's what happened. And it was going really, really well. And we then learn that Ray likes to be taken care of. And that's kind of why he doesn't really help out, which is really thought-provoking. I think that's a really great insight. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who doesn't help out around the house does so or refuses to help out because they like to be taken care of. Some people are just like that because they're lazy. But I did think that was quite interesting. And then they pointed out, but that's more of a mother than a wife. And Ray said, well, maybe that's what I want. The energy that was sucked out of that room, it was amazing. Everybody's reactions when Ray said that, it was just all absolutely fantastic. It was so, so brilliant. And I don't necessarily think that Ray feels that way. I think that's what I believe. I think it was just something he said in the heat of the moment. I don't think that when he looks at Debra, he wants her to be his mother. He has enough of Marie as it is. But in the heat of the moment, that's what he said. And I guess for some people that could actually be the case. Marie is so happy. Her facial expressions in that moment, absolutely fabulous. She is so, so happy. And Debra and Raymond realise that actually this is not something they want to explore. They don't want to get into that. They don't want to know more about Ray wishing Debra was his mother, and they decide to just leave it. I don't think that's the best resolution for the episode insofar as being beneficial, but at the same time, it could still encourage people to go to couples therapy or any kind of therapy. And if it does that for even one person, then it's doing a really great job. And I think there will be elements of relatability, whether you relate to Ray or Debra. I think it has a lot to offer. So I don't think it was the most satisfying conclusion to the therapy part of the narrative, which is pretty much the whole episode. But at the same time, everything else is really strong, so I don't mind that too much. And then we have the final scene. Oh, and I love it. I always avoid spoilers for the really funny moments in my thumbnails, but I really wish I could show this one off because it's just fantastic. Robert had a lot of fun when Ray said what he said about wishing that his wife was more like his mother. So Ray's in the kitchen and minding his own business, I think he was eating food, and Robert comes in, and then he brings in a life-size cardboard cutout of Marie wearing a wedding dress. It's absolutely fantastic. It is so, so funny. And maybe one could argue they're making a mockery of people who wish their wives were their mothers, because I imagine some people do believe that. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think it's just one brother making fun of another brother for something they said that they probably didn't mean. And I think it was just an absolutely fantastic ending. And I'd love to know where that cardboard cutout is now. Somebody has to have that cardboard cutout of Marie. I'd love to know where it is. Counselling is a really funny episode, really thoroughly enjoyable, with a lot to offer as well. As I said, I don't think the narrative concluded as satisfyingly as I would have liked. It just kind of fizzled out, but that's often the case with Everybody Loves Raymond. Not so much in recent episodes or recent seasons. I feel like the earlier seasons fizzled out a lot more, and many of the earlier episodes had really, in my opinion, really poor endings. It just kind of dropped off and they were really unsatisfying at the end. But it hasn't been like that for a while, so I don't mind it too much. Ultimately, Counselling is a really enjoyable episode and it has a lot to offer.